I'm Loki Karuna, and this is Triloquy. Wow, it's it's been a while. Thanks so much for tuning in. I have to say, in short, that life has been lifing. Oh my goodness, I've had so many great opportunities. I've been on the road a lot more than I could handle when it comes to keeping the show going. But really grateful for all of the opportunities and all the orchestras that I've been able to work with. But there's also been some other sorts of life things. The first week that I took a break because I lost someone, and the next week another friend of mine passed away, and there's a lot of opportunity out there, but also a lot of pain and suffering out there. So if you're going through it these days, you aren't alone. Nam Yoho Renge Kyo. There's a lot going on, but thank goodness for music. And I don't know about the music industry as a whole. I think that's been a part of the life that's been life, and I'm going to unpack a bit more of that maybe toward the end of the season. I think I might have to bring Scott, shout out to Scott Blankenship, back in just to help me unpack some things. What are we building here? What is really the future of so-called classical music, and what ways is it actually combating things like capitalism and racism on a broad scale? Just so many questions that I've been having lately that have forced me to make a bit of a pause, but glad to be back this week, and happy to jump right into this week's featured guest, who is Hana Sharif. I was so glad to be introduced to Hana. Hana is the current artistic director of the Arena Stage over in Washington, D.C., the first person of color, the first woman of color in the Arena Stage's history to have that position. I think it's important to have a cross-disciplinary approach to some of these conversations, especially when it comes to gender equity and racial equity in the field. So while the Arena Stage does live more on the theater side of the arts, there are a lot of really interesting cross connections that I'm excited to share with y'all in our conversation today. So huge thanks to Hana Sharif for taking the time to chat with me. Huge thanks to y'all for coming back to the show after a bit of a hiatus, and hope y'all enjoyed this interview. To get this into the interview, I'm going to play a little audio from one of the Arena Stage's upcoming events that you'll be able to learn more about in the description of this episode. Hope y'all enjoy.
My name is Judy Kuhn, and I am playing Lucy Anderson. She's a woman who has had a fantasy about what her life should or could have been. I love doing theater. It's so collaborative, and there's nothing more collaborative than a new musical. I have been in this business for so long. There are a few things people know me for. One would be doing the singing for Pocahontas, the Disney movie. I was in the original Broadway cast of Les Miserables. I played Cosette. I think people need to see Unknown Soldier because understanding and forgiveness is another theme of this show. Sometimes you have to forgive the people that you're closest to. There's always more to them than you understand. You need to look at your parents, your grandparents as whole people. Come see Unknown Soldier at Arena Stage, March 29th to May 5th.
I mean, look, it's incredibly exciting. It is humbling. I had been artistic director of another theater before, so I've gone through my own transition in the past. And, if you've spoken to some of my colleagues, you know that there was a major kind of generational shift in leadership that was happening over the last 5 to 6 years. And so I've heard a lot of stories of how these transitions have gone for my peers across the country. And I have to say, my transition here in DC at Arena Stage has been the best possible version of a transition. I am so fortunate that I am being entrusted to run one of the best theaters and one of the largest theaters in the country, that it has a legacy and an ethos from its founding that is reflective of my core values as an artist. So Zelda Fish-Handler, who was our founding artistic director, literally founded this company against the laws of the land to be a fully integrated company 73 years ago. And that ethos and that belief that and recognition of Black and Brown intellectual, creative, and cultural ingenuity as a good for the arts culture was part of the ethos of this organization. And I also take the reins of the organization from the great Molly Smith, who served as artistic director for the last 25 years and of her generation is one of the great kind of iconic visionary leaders. And so I come into what I consider hallowed ground with a lot of reverence for the legacy and the history and a vision and belief in the possibilities for the future. And I feel very, very fortunate. Molly has been so incredibly generous with me. We had some great conversations, and she left me both the keys to the building, a ship pointed in the right direction, and then very generously said, "And now I'm going to go on like a 5-month vacation so that no one can get to me, and you can really take wings and fly." And the board, everyone, the staff has been incredibly supportive. So as far as a launching is concerned, I could not have dreamed of a better, stronger, more embraced launch. And I want to also just say that the staff at Arena has been extraordinary, and they have embraced my questions and my insatiable curiosity and my exhaustive approach to finding answers and discovering a path forward. So I'm not finding obstruction. I'm finding joy in the process of discovery that we're doing together. And it's I'm happy to come to work every day, which is it's not always true for folks, right?
Indeed. It's one thing to have a really clear vision for the future as you do, but it's really impressive the degree to which you are really familiar with the legacy of Arena Stage. You know the history of this organization. Why is it important for you to come into this role with that knowledge?
Well, for me, at this stage of my career, I am being really selective about the types of jobs that I take and the organizations that I, am investing in. And part of it is because this work is so all-encompassing. And so for me, I look at every opportunity in terms of I understand. So let me just step back for a moment. I understand myself as both an artist and as an arts leader
Mm.
through an understanding of the continuum that I am part of, right? That I am in this space and I hold whatever platform or position I have as a result of the hundreds of women who have come before me, and that I have a responsibility as part of the continuum to help expand the pipeline for the hundreds of women coming behind me.
Mhm.
And not just women, but I think in terms of, women of color in particular. Um, and so in order for me to fulfill that responsibility, I try to understand the ethos and the values of every organization that I walk into. And I really try and evaluate whether or not what I am passionate about, how I view my life's work has alignment with the values of the organization, and whether or not I can be of great service. Can I serve this organization? Can I help this organization more fully realize its values and its mission? Can I serve this wider community? And I don't know how to approach that question without understanding who the organization is, where it has been, where the roots have grown from, how it has been watered, in order to understand whether or not I can actually be of service in its future growth. And so it's fundamental to me. It is not to say that I wouldn't take a job in a place where the values, where the foundation was not aligned from the beginning in the way that it is here at Arena.
Mm.
My last organization, I effectively integrated the organization that was 50 something years old, right? But I still understood the history and the legacy of the institution and the community it was serving. And I, with great intentionality, accepted that job because I believed that I could be of service. I believe that what I brought artistically, what I brought as an ethos in terms of the understanding of the nexus point between art and community, could transform the community I was there to serve, and that I could be of real service there. And so, again, no matter what the roots are, the knowledge of what you're walking into is the greatest preparation for what you're trying to build, in my experience.
I can't help but to think about this idea of serving a community versus being a martyr for a community. You did mention that you are very selective about the opportunities that you pursue.
Yeah.
As much as you talk about serving, I wonder if you could speak to how this role serves you or how you hope that it will serve you.
I believe in the transformative power of art. I often tell people that when I was graduating from undergrad, Spelman College, I had kind of two career pathways in front of me. I was either going to be a civil rights attorney or I was going to be an artist.
Mm,
And at 21, I chose to be an artist because at that time, and I still believe this is true for me most days, at that time, I believed that art was stronger than the law as a way of transforming community and society,
mm,
as a way of understanding and elevating the sense of our own humanity and introducing us to the full humanity of others, and that art was a pathway to liberation and freedom.
wow.
And so um, that's why I do this job. And that I also think of myself as being like fourth generation activist in some way, and that my activism is through art, right? Through creating. It's not an activism that's based on I believe you should believe one thing. It is an activism based on the belief that we are fully human and that all of our stories have value, and that the more we know and understand each other's humanity, the stronger and greater we are as a society, right? That's where my activism sits. But I come from a long line of people who were striving in order to create access and freedom and liberty and the recognition of humanity. And so because I believe that we are here to plant seeds, to grow them, and that growth, what we create should outlive us and should create sustenance for generations to come. Part of what feeds me, part of what fuels me is the understanding that it's not about serving the immediate ego. It is about guaranteeing that my children and my grandchildren and my great great grandchildren will be able to walk into spaces and be more fully known and loved.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I wonder if you'll talk a little bit about your upbringing and your background. Where did you grow up and when did the arts enter your life?
So I was raised in Texas. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. I was a Spell House baby. My father went to Morehouse, and my mother went to Spelman.
Oh, that's
But
perfect.
I was raised in Texas. My mother is from Providence, Rhode Island, and my father is from Beaumont, Texas. And we were raised in Texas. Um, and I don't actually remember a time where art wasn't a part of my life. Some of my earliest memories are artistic experiences. We used to go to this place called the Miller's Outdoor Theater, which was an outdoor theater in Houston, Texas. And at that theater, they would have on the weekends, there might be an opera one day or a ballet the next day or a play. And we would go with our picnic baskets and remember we would sit on the hill and watch the shows and my brothers and I would, run around and dance around and play, and then sometimes be deeply engrossed in the shows. And I also always found a way of understanding myself through the world through writing. So I would say that writing is my first artistic practice. I would write poetry as a child. I write plays and make my brothers perform in them. Um, my mother tells a story of me seeing Porgy and Bess at the Miller's Outdoor Theater, and then for weeks afterwards, putting my little brother in a red wagon and dragging him around singing "I Loves You, Porgy." So I don't remember a time where art was not a part of my life, but also part of our household, right? It's a very musical family. My father inherited his father's record collection. So I have an obsession with vinyl. I have a record player in my office right here. And it was a wide range of music in our house, right? I love all kinds of music. I love classical music. I love country music. I love rock music. I deeply love hip hop and soul and R&B. And my mother made all five of her children play musical instruments. And whether you wanted to or not, you had to learn to play a musical instrument. And it's because she fundamentally believed that being able to play an instrument and read music would teach discipline. And that discipline, no matter what we decided to do with our lives, would be of service. And she also believed that there was something revelatory about being able to translate something, written music from a page into something hopefully beautiful and that had great harmony. That being said, my mother also would have us all practice our instruments at the same time, and she would leave the house. So We had to practice an hour a day in different parts of the house, and she was not sticking around to listen to the cacophony she created by making us all play different instruments.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, that's my childhood.
So the musical training didn't lead you to a career as a professional musician. You're in the theater world. So I wonder how you were tracked into your current career.
Yeah, so my mother would tell you that she loves to tell people that she thought I was a very dramatic child. I don't know if that's actually true, but very early on, I was in like dance classes and I was in theater classes, and I loved theater. Um, I enjoyed performing when I was very young, but I really did, I was writing all of the time, and I always, organizing people to hear the words um, and so I found myself through this kind of theatrical lens. And, I remember again in high school, I was like in the band and I was in theater and I was in the marching band. And if ever I had like a play or a theatrical competition, I would skip the football game to go do theater. Theater always won out. And then I would come back and I would, challenge whoever took my spot to get my spot back so I could do the next marching. But it was like music was always second or third to me in terms of my passion. It was something I loved, but it didn't, I felt most fully myself when I was in the theater. And when I went to college, I continued to do theater, but I was thinking of my life and my work and my service as being um, pointed very squarely towards the law. And um, and yet I always took theater classes. I started a company when I was in college with other artists because we so believed that there were questions we had about the world that weren't being answered with the art that we were seeing. And what I loved about theater is that there was this instant sense of agency, right? That I wasn't writing answers, but that I was writing the questions. And in some ways, by writing the questions, I was writing myself and my experience into existence,
Hmm.
imprinting that experience as valid. And then hearing that experience interpreted through the bodies of other artists, I thought was incredibly powerful. And it is different, I think, than music. You listen to a great song that captures exactly what you're feeling in that moment, and you can relive that exact moment over and over and over again through the music. And there's something incredibly ephemeral about theater, which is a live performance. You can do the same show for a year, and every single time you do the show, it will necessarily be different because theater exists when the audience and the actors meet in that very kind of like special continuum of time, that there is something kinetic that happens between the artist on stage and the artist in the audience. And it can never be replicated.
Hmm.
And so there's something that I find poetic and profound about creating something every night that disappears, and that whether you play it for a weekend or you play it for 3 months, the journey is necessarily evolving. Um, and I think that in some ways it is uh, a metaphor for the way I think life works.
I want to pull on that thread. You used the word evolving earlier in this conversation. You talked about being both an artist and an artist leader. I wonder if you'll talk about that evolution, becoming a part of a whole versus really creating the whole or leading the whole. What was that evolution like for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was a sophomore in college, and our chair of our department, Dr. Glenda Dickerson, had stepped down from the department. And, it's one of those situations where there were no professors in the theater department my senior year that had been there my freshman year.
Mm.
So our class in particular was watching this transition happen. And I remember over some pizza boxes and some, everyone sitting around in my apartment talking about what kind of art we wanted to make and why it was important. And we kind of created this like manifesto/mission statement for what would become Nasir Productions. And I was, the artistic director. And so I would say that I started my professional arts journey as an arts leader first.
Wow.
So I started out running a company that I didn't really know was a company. It's like you start a thing, and you're not quite sure what it is, and then it evolved. And I am really grateful for having that as my foundational experience, because we were all artists who learned to be business folks by doing. And some of us found real facility in that um, administrative professorial work. And there was a moment about 5 years into Nasir Productions where I remember waking up and thinking, oh, I could do this for another 20 years, and maybe we grow the company to be $100,000 or $200,000 annual operating budget. But that we were all moving out of passion for storytelling, but that we hadn't trained in how the business, like we had learned the business by doing, and that there was something that these multi-million-dollar theaters knew that we didn't know. And so I made a conscious decision to the term I've used so often is go in and steal the master's tools. That I was going to go in and I was going to learn as much as I could about how multi-million-dollar theaters functioned, and then take that learning back to my small scrappy theater company. Um, and uh, and, my mother said, you plan and God plans, and God is the best of all planners. I thought I was going to go into the regional theater for a year or two, and I ended up, here I am 25 years later, still in it, still evolving. And I did go in and learn all of those systems. I sometimes say I went in to steal the master's tools, and then instead I re-engineered them, right? Like I learned them, and then I made decisions about how they could be stronger, how they could be better, how they could serve more. And um, there was also an experience that so often I would go into the rooms where I was the first, the only, or the few.
Mm-hmm.
And that came with a level of responsibility too. Right. So it's like if you have this opportunity and you're in this position to be able to greenlight projects, to be able to invest in new artists, and there's no one else in the country in that same position who looks like you,
Mm-hmm.
who has the same investment in artists of like any part of your intersectionality. For me, again, thinking about this kind of multi-generational activism, I understood that that platform came with opportunity and responsibility. And as much as I wanted to go back to running my own company, I understood that I had this moment in this continuum. I had this moment in time where I could affect and influence change on a larger scale. And I made the decision over and over and over again to lean into that responsibility and opportunity. This is again long before there was any language like EDI for it, the work. It was long before anyone was thinking that fundamentally it was a cultural good to have diversity and diverse voices at the decision making table. And so it was so rare, to see. I remember there's an artist and arts leader named Eric Ting, who I think is brilliant, who was the associate artistic director at Longworth Theater down the road from me. And he's an Asian American man. And we were like glued to each other because we were like, there's no one else who looks like us in the roles that we were in around the country. So you think about there are hundreds of theaters, and we're the only ones who are in these critical producerial positions at major regional theaters, and would both support each other but also leverage our networks in order to be able to create opportunities for artists that we believed in and believed deserved access to the mainstream resources that we had this kind of ability to be able to activate. And I think that's what kept me in the kind of regional game for as long as I stayed. And then there was a point about 10 years in where I decided to step away
Mm.
and really wanted to reinvest in myself as a writer. I remember saying, I needed to see if the dreams I had 10 years ago were still my dreams. And that when you're in the work of running an institution or helping run an institution, there are no days off. There's no real time to kind of do the self-reflective evaluation. And I took a little bit of time. I didn't stay completely away from the regional theater as I had intended. But I took different types of roles that gave me a lot of flexibility and some space to breathe and to dream. And at the end of a 2-year period, I decided that I still wanted to be artistic director, that I wanted to be artistic director of a major regional theater. And at that point, I looked around and I realized that there had never been anyone who looked like me in that role. And so I was like, well, I want to do it. And if I'm going to do it, I want to be the first to do it. And so I like realized it meant going back into the regional theater. It meant going back into an associate artistic director role. And I got really clear about um, having great intention around where I worked, the type of work that I did, the type of leader I wanted to work with and for, and what I needed to get out of this next phase of my career in order to make sure that I could break through that glass ceiling. And 5 years later, I became the first Black woman artistic director of a major regional theater in the country when I was announced as the artistic director of the Repertory Theater of St. Louis. And then 5 years after that, I became artistic director of one of the most, I think, compelling and outstanding theaters in the country. Um, and it is uh, certainly the reflection of many dreams. And also, I think this moment is a reflection of intentional mission values driven clarity.
Mm-hmm.
I tell young artists all the time that one of the most important things you can do is be clear about why you want to do what you do. I don't have any value judgment on what your why is, but figure out why you're in this game, because it will break your heart and turn you 6 ways from Sunday. And the thing that's going to get you back up when you get knocked down is understanding why you're in it. And if that why is strong enough, it will get you up every time.
Mm.
It will make you stronger. It will help you fine tune your craft so that you can dig deeper and keep reaching for the thing that you're reaching for. And if you don't know why, it's a really hard business to be in, you know, for shits and giggles.
Yeah. In this post 2020 sort of DEI quote unquote arts ecosystem, it's very
Mhm.
to look at how diverse the stage is. I feel like those
Mhm.
level one of the conversation, but then we have to start talking about whose productions are on stage. What does marketing for historically marginalized communities look like? There's so many levels. Considering how long you've been thinking about art uh, next to social justice and these sorts of things, I wonder what the work looks like for you these days. Again, it's one thing to make sure that a cast is diverse, but what else beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like diversifying what's on stage is the easiest thing. And in fact, 20 years ago, most theaters around the country started doing a bit more work featuring Black and brown bodies. Sometimes it was work featuring Black and brown bodies written from a white lens. Sometimes it was work featuring Black and brown bodies written from a Black or brown lens or Asian lens, or Native lens. And so like that is the easier thing to invest in because it has the most public immediate payoff. Your audiences can come in and go, oh, look how diverse this company is because I got to see. So the question for me is like, if we are actually thinking about how we serve communities and we're actually thinking about how we move with great intention towards creating the strongest business practices for ourselves, because I believe that the strongest business practices are also reflect the diversities, minimally the diversities of the communities that the community you exist in, but also can be aspirational.
Mm-hmm.
That means that the diversity has to exist behind the scenes too. It's not just who do you hire to build a show or run a show, but who is at the table where the choices are made. Who's at the hiring table? Who's at that senior staff table? And what are the complicated and difficult conversations being brought to the fore that assures and tests and holds you and your organization accountable for the values you say you live? And those tables have been um, gate kept in a powerful way in our industry.
Mm.
And I feel very fortunate to be one of several handful of leaders who are breaking through and breaking down those silos and helping build a much stronger um, business case for our industry and helping create a business model that can meet the present and the future in a way that our previous business model did not, and became a necessity as we came out of the worst of the ravages of COVID. Our industry went through quite um, uh, a revolutionary time of transition and change. And we're still trying to figure out what's that new model, what is the new world order that works. And I feel really fortunate to be among a series of artistic directors and managing directors who are meeting those questions head first with a lot of shared insight, brain trust, and courage.
It's no secret that in the classical music world, certainly the orchestral music world, that audience involvement does have a role in the business model of organizations, but largely we're always looking to funders, to donors,
Yes.
chasing the big pockets. I guess two questions: is that also the case in the world of theater, and if so, how does looking at that aspect of the business model through that equity framework actually apply? Does that mean looking for funders of color, vetting funders through an equity lens? What does that part of the work look like for you?
That's a really great question. So, I think the nonprofit model, in grad school, they say, oh, it should be a 60-40 split, and depending on who you talk to, 60% of your funding should be contributed, 40% of your funding could be earned. Some people have it reversed. Unfortunately, and I don't know if you've experienced this in the orchestral world, but we've seen a very real philanthropic shift in many communities. Many regional theaters depended on corporate sponsorship for both their main stage shows, but also all of the other great programming that serves communities. And we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years, major corporations who have long 20, 30, 40, 50-year history supporting art, shifting their philanthropic thrust to education, to healthcare, to veteran issues, all really important, critical issues, but shifting away from the arts organizations who've really depended on their support for the public good work that they do for the last 50 years. So who's filling those holes and those gaps? You're also depending on the individual donor, which tend to be your most loyal patrons, people whose lives have been affected by the arts, people who fundamentally believe in the value of your organization's work. Our donor bases tend to be older, and so there's this question of like, well, if we're losing some of our corporate support and there isn't an influx of federal government support coming in, how do you maintain and grow your organizations? Well, part of that is that you've got to grow your individual donor base. Well, the individual donor base is directly related to people's investment in the work that you do. If we look at the shifting demographics of our country, if we want to have viability and relevance in our cities, then we actually have to be creating work that is reflective of the humanity of the people who live and exist in our cities, not just the people who have traditionally supported our art forms or our organizations. Mm-hmm. And so then the question becomes, how do you create what I like to call radical access to the work, right? Because I believe fundamentally that if you have a great artistic experience that is transformative, I don't care where you sit on the demographic scale or whatever you want to call it, you will find yourself and value in that. And so part of what I think is necessary, and it's just a good business model, we can leave equity and inclusion out of the conversation just for a moment, not because I believe it should be out of the conversation, but just to say, it's not even the equity debate. It is the sustainability of your business debate, right? Which is like, if you can actually get multiple generations to buy in and to support your organization. If you can get a wide range of races and ethnicities to believe that they have a home and that their stories can live and their humanity can live fully within your institution, you have widened the base of people who will be willing to support you,
Mhm.
right? And they don't all have to be mega large gifts. What happens when a community has decided that you are an essential part of their ecosystem? How will they tithe to your organization in
Mhm.
a way that supports your livelihood because they believe that you are essential, right, to their growth, development, and what's the word I'm looking for? Um, cultural ethos.
Mhm.
So I think there's a business case to be made. Separate from that, there is absolutely a demand that we meet our community where it is, that on a equity level that we are really striving to be reflective of the communities in which we sit. There's often a very wide disparity and gap between the people who live in the zip codes that surround your institution, the people who support your institution.
Right. Right.
And that is not by happenstance, right? And so, how do you break down the notion of distance between the community in which your institution sits and the community that your institution serves?
And
How
that
do
was
you widen that?
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was actually where I was going next, because we can talk about programming and really meeting people where they are in that way, but at least on the orchestral side of things, where many people are, especially Black and brown folks, they're at a place where they consider these spaces for white people. So no matter how engaging, how equitable the programming is, there's still that narrative to deal with, that false narrative to dismantle. Is that something that you have to engage on the theater side?
absolutely. Right. So the question is like, how do you do that? How do you break down a mythology
Hmm.
about whose space this is, who deserves access, who is honored in this space? I am so fortunate that I walk into this glorious building. It's like $140 million, beautiful building that has three theaters, right? Um, it is a joy to know that every day I get to help make the decisions about what art goes on that stage and who we're reaching out to and how we're reaching out to people. This is a building that is beautifully constructed. The original building, there are two theaters that were originally part of the building. There's the Fitch Handler, which is our arena stage, and there's the Krieger building. And then Molly Smith, under her leadership, brought the theater through a major renovation that built the facility as you now see it, and also added the third space, which is the Kogod Theater. The original buildings, the exterior walls of the original buildings are encased inside the new building. So when you walk into Arena, you walk through the glass doors, it's beautiful glass building, and you can touch the exterior brick of the house that Zelda built.
Hmm.
And so I often say, this is the house that Zelda built, encased in the house that Molly built. And then people say, well, Hana, well, what's your house? I said, well, my house is the people's house,
Hmm.
right? I don't have to build a physical building. My job is to build the space that to build the invitation so that all of the people come into this house and understand that what Zelda built and what Molly built was built for them, right? That we have these, we have these arts organizations that were built for everyone, but have failed to serve
Hmm.
all that they were built to serve. And so this idea of like breaking down the mythology that this isn't for you, this art form isn't for you, this building isn't for you, this space isn't for you, is fundamental to meeting the future and evolving our institutions. And I guess my question for you is like, how are you guys doing it in the orchestral world? Is it about programming? Is it about messaging? Is it about the invitation? What are you finding, or what are you guys playing with?
Yeah, for me, I think it's programming plays a large role in it, especially when it comes to living composers. It's one thing to, stage Florence Price and Margaret Bonds and all of these incredible Black
Mhm.
women of decades past. There are also Black women living and breathing today. That's one way that I think about it. In addition to how the service, what the service looks like. There's a brilliant arts leader. Maybe you know who she is, Donna Walker Kuhn, and she
Mhm.
helped me understand the difference between audience development and community engagement, and how those two things are not the same. They're very different. And I think, from my end, when we think about the ways in which these institutions can actually serve beyond the transactional relationship of we do something for you so that you come buy a ticket, I think that that's really been key. But what it makes me think about, you mentioned that there are 3 theaters on your campus, but there are far more than 3 theaters within, the few square miles surrounding you. How do you
Yeah.
engage the larger conversation so it doesn't turn necessarily into come to the arena stage as much as it's come engage theater, come engage this art form?
So part of it is being in constant communication and collaboration with my peers, right? One of the things I love about this generation of artistic leaders, we were all thrust into leadership and then also met the largest crisis the industry has ever faced in terms of a global shutdown and having to find a way to reopen and rebuild. And through all of that, we leaned on each other, right? We have Zoom calls and text threads and email threads and really have formed a very close relationship and brain trust and a sense of that all our boats rise together.
Mm-hmm.
And the brain trust is, I'm one who believes 10 artistic director brains are better than one artistic
Sure.
director brain. Like if I've got a problem that I'm noodling, I'm going to bring it to group. And I'm going to say, hey, I'm here's the thing I've been tussling with. Like, let me talk you through my thoughts. And then and what I love is that there is such selflessness in the community. We all want each other to win, right? That I'm not in competition. I believe that more theater begets more theater,
Yeah.
that the more people have experiences with the theater, the more people will demand theater. And so like I'm eager to come out and support you and your work. I will show up at your opening. I will bring my team out to be there. I will, share whatever you have. If there's a show that's coming up, if there's a resource that I have access to that you need, I will leverage what I can and what I have for you. Right. That sense of collaboration, that sense of community, that sense of interdependence is, I think, integral to shifting the narrative in our cities and in our country around our art form.
Mm-hmm.
One singular person cannot do it alone. There is a collective case to be made. And quite frankly, when enough of us come together, everybody benefits. So even those who are like, I'm not interested in the brain trust, still benefits from the ingenuity of the brain trust.
Yep. Yep. So you have the communities that you're targeting that you're thinking about in the theater. So in your role at Arena Stage, I wonder what the stories are that you're most interested in for those communities. And the what I will point out is that there are so many of us, so many Black and brown people who are tired of the trauma stories. We're tired of
Mhm,
seeing Black women beat on stage and raped on,
mhm,
even though
mhm.
it's vital to tell those stories. So I wonder, how do you plan to balance serving these communities, not completely being a space of trauma, but telling the stories that you think need to be told?
Well, look, the first thing I say is that my responsibility is to serve this community, which means that there are a wide range of stories that have to be told, not just stories from the African diaspora, but this is a company that is deeply invested in telling stories that reflect the full spectrum of the American spirit. And I love the idea of expanding the notion of who and what an American is and what stories are fundamentally American. So that's very exciting to me. I also think that we have all, as certainly I'm going to speak as a nation, but this is true globally, we've all come through a significant trauma in the last few years that I don't think we've had a chance to process, right? It's like we came out of stay-at-home orders and it was like trying to find a way back to some kind of quote unquote normal that
Is gone. Yeah.
is never coming back, right? And so it's like trying to reorder your steps and find a new normal and test new ideas. Um, but that part of like coming out of a communal trauma like that, I found that people want to lean into joy. So when I'm programming a season, I am thinking not just about what I am thinking about what's the most compelling art. Yes, that's first. I'm thinking about what are the stories that will promote and create joy? What are the stories that will speak to, the different sectors of my community? And to speak to the question, that you're asking, I don't believe in exploiting the pornography of our pain,
Yep.
right? I think that everyone's story has value, but I also recognize that if you repeat the same trauma story over and over again, you're actually creating a narrative that marginalizes the lived experience and the humanity of a certain people,
Mm.
right? So if every story has a brown woman on stage being raped, then you are solidifying a narrative that limits the humanity of that brown woman. Um, and and so there has to be space where we are actually able to write stories about the complexity of our fully lived experience, right? And so much of it is, it's really interesting. It's not that those stories aren't being written. It's that at the tables where people in power decide whose story is going to be produced,
Mm.
it is easier to monetize our pain than it is to monetize our power.
Mm. Mm.
And so when I am curating a season, I take the question of what is most profitable off the table and I center the conversation on what is most transformative, which also you could translate to being what is most powerful. And I think that radical Black joy is some of the most transformational work out there.
Well, I do have one more question, but before I ask, how can people learn more about these transformative experiences that they can engage at the arena?
Yeah, so you can always go to our website, arenastage.org. We have all of the social media, so Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. You can find us on all of those sites. And I invite you to come on out. If you're in DC, if you're walking along the wharf, we are that giant, beautiful building across the street. And we invite you to come in and experience some really, I think, phenomenal art and artists. I feel so inspired by the people I get to work with every day. And I look forward to meeting you and inviting you to be part of our extended family.
Well, I wanted to close by acknowledging geography a little bit. So,
Yes.
the arena is not in, the middle of Idaho. It's not in Texas. It's in close proximity to our government, to, everything that surrounds what's going to happen this coming November, and I know as artists, at least on the classical music side, there has been this tradition of using the concert hall to escape the noise, to turn
Mhm.
down the world and be away from it. But it seems like at the arena, considering where you are, this November is going to be interesting to say the least. I wonder how you engage that proximity. Should we expect the arena to engage the upcoming presidential election? What's going on in politics and everything in between?
It's so interesting. When I was interviewing for the job, I asked, is there such a thing as too much politics in DC? And everyone was like resounding no. One of the really wonderful things about Arena Stage is, again, you look at the legacy and the history. Arena has been an organization and a theater company that has never shied away from the political, that actually has deeply invested, Molly in particular, deeply invested in plays about historic figures and also history as it was actually happening. There was a series of commissions called the Power Plays, that are plays that tackle a different decade in American history. And those power plays have birthed a play about Justice Anthony Scalia, and plays about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and plays about presidents, and just last year they did a show called My Body No Choice, which was a direct response to the Supreme Court striking down Roe versus Wade. And so I enter into an organization that has a deep and rich history of telling political stories and wide ranges of political stories, not stories, nonpartisan stories, or sometimes deeply partisan stories, depending on the writer's point of view. And so I would say that it's really exciting to be at an institution where you have the opportunity to tell stories that where your audience is comprised of people who actually will make decisions where about the way the rest of the world will experience the choices, right? And I also think about that in terms of a responsibility. Like, what is the responsibility of an institution that sits so close to the seat of power in this country? How do we speak to that? And not from Hana's political ethos, but how do we share what is at the surface of the zeitgeist for the people? It is a wonderful opportunity to be in a space where that is not only encouraged but expected.
A little trombone music to get us out of that conversation. That's the Concertino for Trombone and Strings by the composer Lars Erik Larsson, as brought to you by the Bard Conservatory. I'm sharing that because the featured soloist is Weston Sprott, who I learned is the cousin of Hana Sharif. After we cut the mics, we just had a little bit of a chit chat, and she let me know that music is in the family. So really glad to understand and learn about that connection, and really honored to get to sit down and talk with Hana. I hope y'all enjoyed our conversation, and hope you'll check out some of the things that are happening at the Arena Stage if you're ever in the Washington, D.C. area. Again, as I said before the interview, I think it's really important for us to take that cross-disciplinary approach to things moving forward. You know, folks in the theater world are experiencing things that we can learn from over here in music and vice versa. So it's always a pleasure for me to be able to connect those dots. Always a pleasure to tap over into the theater world. All right, I'm gonna keep it really, really super duper short for this week's Triloquy because got a lot on my plate. But wanted to make sure that I said hello to y'all and let y'all know that I'm still alive. So basically, the issue that I've been dealing with, well, there are a lot of issues I've been dealing with, mostly personal, but professionally, it's this idea of what comes next. We've been talking a lot, especially since 2020, and even before, of course, for generations. But most recently about diversity in programming, diversity on stage. In my work with the American Composers Orchestra, diversity amongst composers, addressing gender equity, and as first and second steps, all of these things are really good and really important. But I can't help but to think about the broader picture. What does American capitalism have to do with all of this, and how can we combat it? How can we raise awareness around anti-black capitalism as the reality in the United States if we look at things historically? I'm living in New York. There's houseless people everywhere. There's a so-called migrant crisis going on right now. Families who are on the streets, looking for a better life, who don't have anywhere to go. Who are we? And what is our positionality in our ivory towers of classical music? And as much as we're working hard to make it better for what? Or make it better for whom? And I feel like I get here often, and I'm sure I've even talked about it on the Triloquy podcast before, but, taking a step back has been something that I've been doing lately, and really determining what the future looks like for me and my involvement in classical music, and how I can exist. There are so many people who have no problem, no personal qualms with playing orchestra concerts or programming for radio in the way that it's always been done. And obviously, as folks who've been listening to this show for a while understand, that's not me. So by shifting gears and going into new music and really focusing my mind on that, I thought I had really found my place. But even within the world of new music, those same issues are there. I want to shout out Caesar, who introduced me to my Buddhist practice. One of the things that he always teaches and tells me is that you can't run from your karma. So if you're having difficulties, for example, on your job, and you and your boss are getting into it, your karma is probably what's at play. It's not just your relationship with that individual person, it's your relationship with structures and systems of authority. So getting a new job may result in the same problems popping up. Well, I think I'm experiencing the same thing in so-called classical music. The issues that I experienced in the orchestra world started to pop up in the radio world, as many of y'all know, the infamous firing of the radio host at that time named Garrett McQueen from American Public Media. So I couldn't run from my karma in that way. Becoming an entrepreneur and doing my own thing for a while, there were some of those same challenges, some of those racial challenges, and even economic challenges that popped up. Well, now in my work in new music with the American Composers Orchestra, it's so rewarding just to see the gratitude on these composers' faces and the determination on these musicians to do the work of pushing music into the next generation by centering living, breathing composers. That's something that I can't even explain how good it feels to be on the ground. But, on the in-betweens, some of those same challenges, some of those same economic challenges, as far as resources and who pays for these things and fundraising, that's always a challenge. Of course, the racial challenges, most of these orchestras that I engage have no black people, if only they have one or two. So I guess maybe I'll pause there. It's about running from karma, or our inability to run from karma. Where is the change? How can the change be made? Maybe the change has to be made exactly where we are in the field. If you are a performing musician and you're facing challenges, the challenges are everywhere. They're in the admin side, they're on the radio production and recording side, they're on the new music side. So I'm mentioning this maybe to encourage myself, but to encourage each and every one of you or anyone out there who is really facing those challenges. We can't run from our karma. You know, it's very mystic that of all of the things that, and I feel like I'm getting heady here, but it's of all of the things that we could have been exposed to and dedicated our lives to, we all landed some way, somehow in this world of so-called classical music. We can leave the field, we can stay in the field, but those things that are deeply embedded within us, those things that will make us better people and in turn make a better world, they're right here where we're standing. It's hard for me to swallow that sometimes because I've been wanting to separate myself from this field, especially considering some of the, you know, personal challenges, you know, loss of life that's been happening, the memorial ceremonies that I have missed, the relationships that I could have built with family and friends that I didn't build because I had to go to this concert or I had to facilitate this new music reading. It really puts things into perspective, and a perspective that I'm looking forward to continuing to explore with y'all. So maybe I'll see y'all next week. Maybe I won't. I don't know. But until next time, keep fighting. See y'all then. Peace.